Welcome to Channel 17, the Town of Colonie Government Channel.
All right, well, welcome to So Many Books, So Little Time. My name is Joe Nash. I'm here with Zina, Shevchik. We are both librarians at the Colonie Library. If you don't know the premise of our show, it's very simple. We go down to the new bookshelf here in the library, and we go to our technical services department where they're processing all the new books that aren't out on the shelf yet, but they may be out there by the time you see this. And we bring up a whole bunch of these new books, and we're going to tell you about some of them from what we know of them and some of the reviews we read. So, as usual, Zina will go first. It's our first book.
Okay. My first book is a big book. It's called Hallmark, A Century of Caring. It's the 100th anniversary in 2010 of the first Hall store that was set up in Nebraska. And we all know Hallmark from cards and other products that they have produced, including television shows, and they now, I guess, have a cable network as well. It tells a story of the Hall family and the many generations that have kept the industry, their card industry business going and developing, and it's beautiful book. As I'm talking, I'll open to some of the gorgeous photographs that are in this book. Of course not. Of course I'm opening to the white and black pages, but they came from very simple means in Nebraska. And a hardworking family. They were very poor, and it was a family of 3 boys and a girl. And they became entrepreneurs very young, just making money by selling popcorn and lemonade. Their town was a crossroads for the railroads at the end of the 19th century. Am I getting this right? And how they got into the greeting card and postcard business. It's very interesting, talking about how postcards were developed the picture postcards were developed in Europe in the 1800s, and they also were used a great deal during World War II. The soldiers in World War I. The soldiers used picture postcards to communicate with their families and loved ones. And after World War I, it became a real cultural phenomenon, picture postcards. And their store, the Hall store in Nebraska, became one of the first wholesalers of picture postcards. And then they became wholesalers of greeting cards later on, which actually were used in Europe way before they were at least produced in the United States. It talks about the Hall's family in collaboration with Walt Disney, with Charles Schulz of Peanuts fame, and let me look at a few other people. Churchill, Winston Churchill and the Churchill family, Norman Rockwell, and lately, most currently, Maya Angelou. And it talks about it's a history really of the cultural kind of development of the arts in Kansas City, Missouri, which is where they moved early in the 1900s. And it's a fascinating story of development of technology in the 20th century, how they produce the cards, how they distribute their other products, wrapping paper, figurines, and it's a very poignant story, and I think it would interest all sorts of people. So, Hallmark, A Century of Caring, by Patrick Regan. Joe?
Okay, well, my first book is a bit on the somber note. It's a book about the Iraq-Afghanistan war. It's called The Good Soldiers, by David Finkel. He's the Pulitzer Prize-winning reporter for the Washington Post. He was embedded with one battalion for a year, I think 14 months, with I think a battalion's 800 men. And he goes through with them from when they left in the fort in the Midwest somewhere, I forgot where. And he goes with them when they're deployed. He lives with them over in Iraq for 12 or 14 months. But when they go on leave, he sort of covers them too. And he also, when some of them go back because of their injuries, he goes to the hospitals and covers. So he covers what it's really like with one battalion. I'm sorry. And
what's the difference between a platoon and a battalion?
I don't know.
A battalion's bigger. That's all I know.
So he stays with this one group, and you get to know a lot of the guys. He covers, there's 800 men in this group. He sort of covers 20 or 30. You get to know a lot of them, and he covers the commander. And during the course of the year, 12 men die, and he covers all that. And it's really, I hate to sound sort of contradictory. It's a great book, but it's sort of sad and depressing and all that. But the other good thing about the book is a lot of the books about the war, the reporter writes himself in the story. I went here, I did this. The author here, David Finkel, is totally not in this. He just observes and writes a journalistic account, and it's really it's sort of flat writing, but it's more like just the facts, and it's a really great book. But ultimately, you come away with it both impressed by the soldiers and their courage and everything, and sort of depressed by the situation. And they talk about going on these convoys and the Humvees blowing up and the injuries. The scenes near the end where he's in the hospital visiting some of the men who were injured are just absolutely heartbreaking. But anyway, a book we probably all should read. It's of all the Iraq war books, this one has been getting the reviews that saying it's the best one. I mean, there's many of them. They're probably all good, but this one, The Good Soldiers by David Finkel. Zina?
Okay. My next few books are have some relationship to England. I'm an Anglophile, and
yes,
that's what you
right.
say when I like all things English. Well, I won't say all things, but this is a fiction book. I'm trying hard to bring fiction books to the forefront here in my presentations because I don't read much fiction besides mysteries and thrillers. So this is something a little different, and it's by Sebastian Faulks, and that's Faulks. Apparently he's well known, but I didn't know. I've heard the name, but I've never read anything about him, and I looked at this initially because the story is based in London, and it sounds like a really good book. I guess this author, Sebastian Faulks, his most well-known book is a 1995 book called Birdsong, and he did get quite a prestigious award, British award for that book. So this is getting good reviews. It traces the lives of 7 people in London during 7 days in December 2007. I'm beginning to think there's a pattern here, 777. And they all are connected in some way because they ride the London Tube, which is what we call a subway, the same line. They call it the Circle Line, and it does a loop, and I'm sure there's a metaphor there. And as I said, it's getting very good reviews. It's not a mystery or a thriller. It just talks mainly about relationships between people. And I recommend it. I just read a couple of chapters and I'm enthralled. So Sebastian Faulks, you think that's how I pronounce it? A Week in December.
Okay. I have a fiction book for later. I see we don't do fiction as much here. But first, I have this book. On our last show, I talked about a book that was a biography of Mark Twain, only a certain part of his life when he was out west, and how that sort of turned him into Mark Twain, and from Samuel Clemens, and how that one period really affected the rest of his life. So this is a similar book, but it's about Charles Darwin, and it's only about 5 weeks in his life, and there's some parts before and after, but do you know what 5-week period that might be, Zina, in Charles Darwin's life that so affected his life?
When he was on ship down in South America.
I would say you're right.
I'm sorry, the Beagle. The
Yes.
Beagle, I'm getting it, and it's called, what are the islands called? I want to say Galapagos?
Yes, you are correct. The book is called Darwin in the Galapagos Islands, Footsteps to a New World, by a husband and wife team, scientific team, Kay Thalia Grant and Gregory Estes. This book, what they did, they went down to the Galapagos Islands. They're both, trained naturalists and, biologists and all that. They followed Darwin's original route in his 5 weeks sojourn there as part of his world trip there. And I think they used Darwin's journals and the maps that he actually drew. And, Galapagos Islands is really hasn't changed that much since the 1830s. So they trace his original route, and they sort of go over some of his discoveries and what happened down there. And this was the pivotal moment in his life. The 5 weeks of the Galapagos Islands convinced Darwin that there was evolution. It took him years to write the book and everything. But the book has a lot of pictures and maps and pictures of the finches, the famous finches. I don't know if you can. There's all the bird heads, the finches, the beaks. And it's lavishly illustrated, as they say, and it looks, it looks like very interesting. They do cover Darwin's life before and after, but the book mainly is about the 5 weeks. They go from his journal back to their journey, and they sort of go back and forth, what it was like then, what it was like now, and how all this affected the writing of his book on evolution. So, Darwin in the Galapagos Islands, Footsteps to a New World, Kay Thalia Grant and Gregory Estes.
Okay.
Zina?
This again is a novel called My Wife's Affair by Nancy Woodruff, and it's set in London. It's actually follows the unraveling of a marriage between a journalist, a business journalist, and his wife, who was an actress before, and they're New Yorkers. And he's transferred to London for a job. And in the previous years to this transfer, the wife, who had been an actress, as I mentioned, had been home raising 3 young children. And when they moved to London, she gets a fabulous acting job on the London stage, one-woman show portraying the life of a real-life actress in the 1800s, someone named Dora Jordan. And it follows the unraveling of the marriage as the main character, Georgie, that's the girl, the woman, the wife, gets more and more wrapped up in her role as this Dora Jordan actress. And it's written from the husband's perspective, his point of view as to the unraveling of the marriage. And it's gotten fine reviews as a worthwhile read, except for one snarky review by a review source we know as sometimes snarky,
yes.
Kirkus Reviews. Again, I started to read this last night, and I was pulled in right away. And of course, because it's in London, I'm interested in that. But I highly recommend this, A Wife's Affair, Nancy Woodruff. Try it.
Yes, that book got really good reviews. All the reviews I read said it was very, very good.
Except for Kirkus.
Except for that one, yes. Well, this could be a record for doing fiction on our show. I'm going to talk about a novel now, too. And it also has a connection to England because the author lives in England. So they don't take place in England, which I'll tell you. The book is called Unseen Academicals by Terry Pratchett. If you don't know who Terry Pratchett is, this book is about the 30th, I think 30 or 32nd book in a series he's written. It all take place in this sort of fantasy world, I guess you could say, called Discworld. To try and explain what Discworld is would take hours, but suffice to say that these books are extremely funny, and they satirize everything you can think of. And this one here is called Unseen Academicals. Is about the football team at the Unseen University. On Discworld, the university is called Unseen University, but you have to read some of them to understand all this. But the only way I can describe his books are, first, they're extremely funny. They're very, very funny and satiric. And think of, say, Tolkien, J.R.R. Tolkien, or any of the most elaborate mythology or fantasy, serious things you've read, and sort of mash it up with Monty Python and throw in a little Kurt Vonnegut, and you sort of get the idea. They're totally unique, and a lot of the same characters turn up throughout all the books, not in every single book, but in a lot of them. And many of them have to do with, let's see, there's a whole bunch of them that have to do with the City Watch. These are the guys who are like the policemen up the Discworld and the main city. And then there's a group about the witches. There's these 3 witches that they have certain adventures a lot. They show up in some of the books. There's a whole series that are about the wizards. The wizards are in this one because they run the Unseen University. There's one of the most interesting things about all the books is Death. Death, as we see him, personified with the scythe and the hood. He's in a lot of the books, and whenever Death talks, it's always all capital letters. So there's a whole bunch with him. And they really spoof or satirize all our institutions, politics, newspapers, the music world, Hollywood, religion, education. They even spoof history and philosophy and time itself. There's a group in here called the Time Monks. They sort of run how the time runs on the Discworld, and they actually, I would say, spoof fantasy and mythology and storytelling, and I think ultimately I could say they spoof narration itself. I don't know, but one of the books is called Small Gods. It is the funniest book I've ever read, and I've read a lot of books. It is the funniest book. So this is the latest Discworld book. I wish I could explain more about the Discworld, but you'd have to read a couple to truly understand it. It's a fantasy world, but it's sort of a satiric world too. But they're very funny. And Terry Pratchett, this is the third, I think it's like the 30 or 32nd, Unseen Academicals by Terry Pratchett, the latest Discworld book. So Zina.
Okay. My third England-related book. This is called James May's Toy Stories. Now, James May's is a British, and he would call himself probably a broadcaster. He's, some of the reviews I read, they called him a television presenter. He is a co-host on a show in the BBC, the British public television programs, and he also is a journalist. I guess he has a column that he writes about hilarious things. This is a homage to his love of classic toys. And I would say he's an artist as well, because he tells the story of several classic toys. In Britain, plasticine is a modeling clay, and I guess the difference between plasticine and our Play-Doh is that the Play-Doh dries out. It's made of different material, but it's something like plasticine. It's something like Play-Doh. But he talks about how he creates situations where adults can play with these classic toys. With the plasticine, the modeling clay, in 2009, he and 2,000 members of the public created a flower garden at the Chelsea Flower Show in London. And it was life-size, good size. It said 2.5 tons. 2.5 tons, I don't have it in front of me. A lot of tonnage of plasticine. And the public loved it, apparently. I guess you would call those art installations, like the creation of the flower garden in plasticine. And then he did a project with what we would call erector sets. They call it Meccano. And I guess erector sets are actually Meccano sets. And he created an actual bridge that spanned a river between Leeds and, I'm not sure, two towns in Britain. And then he talks about Legos, and they actually created an art installation of a full-sized Lego house. It was the first one, and I guess Guinness Book of World Records was at all of these art installations. And it's fascinating that and at the end he actually has a timeline and like a tree genealogical tree almost of the creation of these toys and the development of these toys and how they changed over the last century. And it's really funny.
This is obviously before the days of computer games and video games.
Yes, exactly. These are classic toys, right. James May's Toy Stories, as seen on BBC, it says.
Okay, now, here's another somber book. I was looking at the books I picked today, a very heavy-duty, serious books, except for the Discworld book. But this book looked interesting. I was looking at it. Then as I sort of was skimming it and was reading it, it looked very interesting, but thoroughly depressing. But anyway, it's called Waste, Uncovering the Global Food Scandal by Tristram Stewart. And according to the author, I guess he took years writing this. According to the author, it says here, farmers, manufacturers, supermarkets, and consumers in North America and Europe discard up to half their food, enough to feed all the world's hungry at least 3 times over, and I think restaurants too. So it's really about all the food waste, and to say half, it is a lot of food. And the book's divided up into 3 parts. He talks about the first part is all these different places and how they waste food: supermarkets, manufacturers, restaurants, our own house, our homes. The second part is about farming, all different kinds, farming, fishing, the meat industry, stuff like that. And the third part, well, before I mention the third part, I'm just going to go through a few things here. There's some pictures here when he takes pictures of all these wasted foods all over the place. For example, here's one example, one of many. This book is kind of long. There's this sandwich supplier. I don't know what country this is, but there's a sandwich supplier, and then the bread company that supplies the bread, they require them to get rid of four slices of bread from each loaf, the 2 crusts and the first piece. So so he goes to this factory where they supply the sandwiches. So they waste 13,000 slices of bread a day. 13,000 slices of bread a day. I mean, it's unbelievable. And here's a picture of you probably can't see that, pastry trimmings. I think it's around these pastry frozen pies or something. But the waste of this one picture is unbelievable. And they just throw it away. And there's all kinds of pictures of whole fields, acres and acres of crops of surplus oranges and tomatoes and spinach and potatoes that are just either didn't meet the requirement and they're just left to rot, and they get rid of them. So it is sort of depressing as I was looking at it. But the third part of the book, unlike a lot of books that just analyze a problem and say, here's the problem, this guy tries to come up with some remedies to the situation. So he has chapters in the third part on reducing, redistributing, and recycling, and what people can do on their own in their house. So it looks like there perhaps is some hope there in the last section. So it's called Waste, Uncovering the Global Food Scandal by Tristram Stewart. So there's food for thought, I guess.
Food for thought. This is a complete departure. Adirondack Trails with Tales. History hikes through the Adirondack Park and Lake George, Lake Champlain, and Mohawk Valley regions by Russell Dunn and Barbara Delaney. This was published last year. We just got it recently. We also have a book similar to this with the same idea by the same authors. Trails with Tales, History hikes through the Capital Region, Saratoga, Berkshires, Catskills, and Hudson Valley. That one's a little bit older. Let's see, that says we received it in 2006. So the title tells you pretty much what the book is about. The authors are New York certified guides through the Adirondacks and surrounding areas, and they picked a couple of standards. John Brown's cabin up near, my brain just went dead, up in the northern Adirondacks. And let's see, here they go. Hikes include Coon Mountain, which I'd never heard of, Crown Point, His Majesty's Fort, Fort Ticonderoga, Ironville, Rogers Rock, and Shelving Rock Mountain. Actually, my husband and I were hiking around the Shelving Rock Mountain, and there was a little plaque that told us that it was a certain had been a former land owned by, it was an estate. I can't remember the person's name, but this book shows the hike we took, but it also explains about the estate owners and how it came to be public land, and the story of the family. And that's the kind of thing that this does. And I found it fascinating. It adds a little bit more to the actual hike, to know the area that you're visiting. It talks about Cooper's Cave, and in conjunction with Cooper's Cave, it talks about James Fenimore Cooper and the Last of the Mohicans. And so I highly recommend this for anyone who is interested in hikes. The hikes are not terribly strenuous. There are things I can do, like the Shelving Rock mountain hike. Then they're not that strenuous. So Adirondacks Trails with Tales, and its companion book, Trails with Tales for the Capital Region.
All right. Yeah, I think the authors live in Albany. They wrote a book about the waterfalls up in
Yes, it does say that
Catskills.
they do write about waterfalls. There's a series of guidebooks. Yep.
Well, a couple years ago, I read a really good book called Positively Fifth Street, and it was a book about the World Poker Championship and the history of it by James McManus, and it was a fascinating look into, poker is very popular now, particularly on the TV. Now, you wouldn't think watching poker on TV would be interesting, but it's really...
It doesn't seem interesting.
Well, they show you what they have. You know the hands they have, so that makes it, you can see the bluffing and the betting. But anyway, the book Positively Fifth Street, a great book about poker championships. So James McManus has a new book. It's called Cowboys Full, The Story of Poker. It's a history of poker. And particularly in America, it's like a cultural history. He goes into all kinds of things here. There's a whole chapter about politicians play poker and, and stuff like that. But he goes back to the Civil War. I think he goes back through the poker's roots in China, the Middle East, and Europe. And now poker is the most popular card game all over the world. This is Europe, East Asia, Australia, South America, and in cyberspace. So, I haven't really looked at it, but Positively Fifth Street was such a great book, wonderful read. He's a good writer. I'm sure this book is well worth reading. It's kind of long, but so if you're interested in anything to do with poker, not just the game itself, but like I say, the cultural history of it, and strategies, and a lot of famous people, the place of poker in our culture, in movies and plays. Poker is, it's sort of an all-American thing, but this is the whole story of it all by James McManus. Cowboys Full, The Story of Poker.
Again, another departure. This was, I thought, very different. It's called LISTS, L-I-S-T-S, for Life, The Essential Guide to Getting Organized and Tackling Tough To-Dos by Rory Tahari. And it's in the shape of a pad, a list-making pad. And I found it, I'm not a particularly organized person, and I found this fascinating, personally, because I'm going on a trip to London in the fall. And in here they have a section on travel, lists when you're going to travel, and they have a section on just international travel to-dos, and this is great, so you don't miss anything. It's in this simple format of lists, and it actually has like accommodation to-dos, rental car to-dos, and then it has a timeline. 7 to 10 days prior to leaving, 2 days before departure, 1 day before departure, day of departure, and then after the trip. And it talks about phone numbers to carry with you. It has lists of when you're about to have a baby, how to get organized when you're a new homeowner. I think visiting the doctor, when you're going to have a doctor's visit, when you're going to the beach, wedding, typical things like that. But I thought it was a way for particularly us women who seem to do a lot of the list making, having to do with those activities, to just check ourselves on whether we're thinking of everything. So Lists for Life Rory Taheri.
All right, I have one more here, a very thick book. I don't know, it's in the I think it's 950 pages almost. But every once in a while, a book comes along that all the reviews just call monumental, and this book is one of the first ones I've read in a long time. I haven't read it, I mean, the reviews. This book is being called monumental and epic, and totally, it took 30 years for the guys to write. It's called The Evolution of Childhood, Relationships, Emotion, and Mind by Melvin Konner. And this guy, what he's done is gone through all of human history and practically every subject. I mean, basically he's trying to answer the question, what is a human being? Basically, what it means to be a human being. And the book is filled with biology, evolution, sociobiology, neuroscience, social psychology, ethnology, psychology. It encompasses, every field just about. The book he's divided up into 4 sections, and I think it's called The Evolution of Childhood because we're the only species, that has this period, childhood in the human world. And I'm going to read, the book's got 4 parts. I'll read you the 4 parts, but the book has got a lot of science to it, but all the reviews I read just saying this is just totally an epic book. So the first part is, the book has 4 parts. The first part is called Evolution, the phylogenetic origins of childhood. Again, it goes all through history, through all these subjects I just mentioned. It's what would you say, cross-discipline, cross-cultural? He studies everything. So that takes up a couple hundred pages. The second part is called Maturation, Anatomical Bases for Psychosocial Growth. That takes up a couple hundred pages. Part 3 is called Socialization, the Evolving Social Context of Ontogeny. I'm not even sure what that word means.
Me either.
And the 4th part is called Enculturation, the Transmission and Evolution of Culture. So he does cover science, but he does cover sociology. And the reviews I read of this book are just saying this is an absolutely epic book. So.
But it's not a textbook, right?
It's not a textbook, but I'm looking at it.
Educated adult reader?
Yeah, but if you give it a shot, it's probably worth reading. It does have charts and graphs, but it's basically text. It looks like it could be a little academic-y, but the reviews I read said it was pretty readable and all that, but it really takes up basically everything. I think one of the reviewers in the back says he's doing nothing less than trying to understand what it means to be human. So it's it's quite the book.
Yes.
So anyway, the evolution. There'll probably be a lot of reviews out pretty soon on this book. The Evolution of Childhood, Relationships, Emotion, Mind by Melvin Konner. So before we end, I'm just going to mention one quick thing. This show will be on in May and June. This fall, here at the library, if people want to prepare, we just bought, I think, almost 100 copies of this book. The month of October here at the library is going to be devoted to this book. It's called One Town, One Book. We're going to try and get as many people as possible to read this book, Mayflower by Nathaniel Philbrick. He's the author of In the Heart of the Sea, A Story of Courage, Community, and War. We're going to have several book discussion groups on this book. We're going to have a lot of events and programs planned around this book and the pilgrims and everything. And this book is, I think it was on the bestseller list last year or 2 years ago for a long time. And it's really a lot of the history that we didn't learn in school about the pilgrims and coming over and all that. So look for over the summer and early fall for numerous events. They're all going to take place in October. And if you want to come in this summer and get a copy, we're going to have them all ready. I think we got a grant to pay for some of this. I think we bought 100 copies.
At least 100.
So that's Mayflower by Nathaniel Philbrick. So that'll be coming up in October. So any more books from you, Zina?
I do, but I think we're out of time.
All right, we're out of time. Well, then thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.